So with both titles decided in favour of Red Bull Racing and Max Verstappen, Formula One heads to Austin, Texas for the US Grand Prix. Always a favourite with teams, drivers and us, the fans, as well. But what's up for grabs at Circuit of the Americas? I'm Martyn Lee from the Autosport podcast. To join me looking ahead to this weekend, Jonathan Noble and Jake Boxall-Legge. Guys, thanks for joining me. Let's begin with a quick reflection then on the season. Now that the championships are wrapped up, John, I've asked, I think both of you individually on various podcasts, how will Max attempt to race the rest of the season? You've both said beast mode, as always, he'll want to win. But John, let me ask you, I'll try a bit of a nuance on that question. The parts are getting towards the end of the season. The team, they're tired. They're looking forward to 2024. Could they use any of these races as extended test sessions? How do we expect Red Bull to go with these final races of the season? Do they want to win everything, or can they throw a few things in that, I mean, they might not win a few races, but they've got a leg up on next year?
I think they're going to be the same flat-out determination to win everything, and there's absolutely no reason. The RB19 is still the class of the field. There are certain tracks where perhaps the advantage isn't as great as others. I'm thinking Qatar, high, medium speed venues where the McLaren can push it, but I think we didn't see the full potential of the Red Bull in Qatar, for example. And I see no reason. Max has only got one gear, which is basically wants to win. He'll be going out to win all these remaining races. And I think we may get to the end of the season and find that, Singapore was the odd one out and the only one they missed this year.
JBL, do you have any sympathy for the hard work and engineers that at this stage of the season are patching up the cars? Now on TV they look very glamorous, but if you get up close to a Formula One car this stage of the season, there's a few bits that are held together with, double-sided sticky tape. Do you think there's any chance that some of the teams might be thinking, we're getting to the end of the life of our parts and things like that? Do we need to back off just a little bit? Or are Red Bull and the others just going absolutely flat out even as we get to the end of the season?
I think it's a mix. I think you've got the case of a few teams going, we can't go any further with our car. We've already settled on what we're going to do for next season. So I think that's their main priority. But we've got a few teams like Haas that are going to bring new parts. And again, this will all play into what they do for 2024 as well. So there's still value in putting the money and the resource into developing that car, because for next season there might be, it might be something that they hadn't previously thought of. So I think there's still value in it. As you say, obviously the mechanics are super professional and do an amazing job, but there's cars that are, going to have done 22 races by the end of the season. Next season they'll be even more patched up, but they've worked flat out all season just to get these cars ready, and the sport wouldn't be where it is without the mechanics. So a lot of people are looking forward, looking at their calendars, looking at their watches and thinking, is this season over yet? I just want to have a holiday now.
I wouldn't blame any of them. And I think there's probably a few bonuses being spent in the kitchen showrooms around Milton Keynes as Red Bull staff get their win bonus for this year, and thoroughly well-deserved as well. But John, you and I made a video recently, a couple of parts actually, with Blake Hinsey, who's Break F1 on his channels. And we were talking about the data behind Formula One. And we said, this is recency bias, we know, because McLaren are in the ascendancy more recently. But Circuit of the Americas, could it suit McLaren? Could they be the team that take the challenge to best of the rest this weekend?
I think best of the rest, yes. I think that McLaren has come on leaps and bounds. It's a team fully focused on the developments that have come. It's improved. It's got better. It doesn't appear to have any major weaknesses now. But I think the critical thing is there are still areas it's behind the Red Bull. We saw in Qatar and Suzuka that in medium, high-speed corners, it can be a match to the Red Bull, but it still lacks efficiency, still down on the straight compared to where Red Bull can be at, and it's still not great in slow-speed corners. So Suzuka, it struggled on the straights. Once it took some downforce off after 3 practice back into qualifying in the race, it struggled a bit on the straights, wasn't so brilliant through the chicane. And Austin's got this much bigger variation of speed corners compared to Qatar. We've got some pretty slow speed stuff. We've got that long back straight as well. So I think don't expect them to be, knocking on Red Bull's door like they were in Qatar, but no reason why they can't be up there as best of the rest. I think Ferrari and Mercedes got a new floor, some floor upgrades coming, which will lift it a little bit. But I think the McLaren's made a decent step So I expect them to be leading that chasing pack again.
JBL, what about Mercedes and Ferrari? Seen Ferrari pretty quick over a one-lap pace, and Mercedes say, hey, if we'd have been where we should have been in Qatar, our race pace would have been good, and McLaren wouldn't have had it all their own way. What are you looking at for those two teams this weekend?
Yeah, I feel like it's a continuation of what we've seen all season long, where the second best team continues to change race by race. And although the progress that McLaren has made has been, astronomical over the season, there are still races where it kind of has to take a back seat to one of those teams. We saw that in Singapore. Maybe Ferrari took the most of its opportunities and Mercedes didn't, actually. It's going to continue to be this ebb and flow. I think McLaren are sort of, settling towards having the second best car overall, but you can never discount them, really. There will be parts of the circuit where the Ferrari will actually be quite good. There will be parts of the circuit where the Mercedes is actually quite good. It just kind of depends on, if you're looking at the circuit as a whole, who kind of has the best measure of it, who can sort of have best median, pace, depending on the characteristics of the corners and that sort of thing. There's a lot of things to consider at Austin. As John said, there's a very big variation in corners that will tend towards some teams and move away from other teams. It just depends on how each team reacts with them. I expect Mercedes and Ferrari to still be in that fight. It's, they've been there all season, so anything other than that would be a disappointment.
As long as they hire the same helicopter pilot as they always do, that gets those amazing shots of the start finish and then up the big hill as well. Like, that guy is amazing, or girl, I don't know who flies it. But let's talk a little bit, John. You wrote a really interesting news piece for our websites about Lewis Hamilton being penalised for crossing a live track when he crashed out of Qatar, which is fine. He held his hands up and said he was very sorry, shouldn't have done it. €50,000 fine or dollar fine, which was suspended for half that if he doesn't do the same thing again. The FIA are going to reopen that and have a look at it, which is, fine in case you want to think, actually, the precedent's not quite right. We want to make sure we give out the right punishment for the right crime. What I thought was interesting about your story was this line that they're going to look at the fact that he's a role model in the sport. And that caught my eye, because you can't change the punishment according to the driver. It's the punishment or not. You can't, if a rookie punts off somebody on a corner, you can't go, it's his first year, let him off. Whereas, if a world champion does it, you come down hard on them. So can you explain that a little bit more? What's happening?
Yeah, I think this is not really about kind of going back and saying, oh, Lewis, you only got a €50,000 fine, we're now going to triple it or give you 5 points or something. I think it's about setting a precedent for the future. And I think the feeling coming out of Qatar is maybe the situation wasn't dealt with as strictly as it could. And interestingly, same weekend, there was the FIA World Karting Championships in Italy, and a British racer called Joe Turney was fighting for the lead, got involved in a tangle at turn one of the track, went off into the gravel, pulled his kart back onto the track, and as he was pushing the kart to get going again onto the live track, he got hit by another competitor, suffered some leg injuries. So I think there's a feeling within the FI that this is something that should not be tolerated at all. This is, a super serious offence. Drivers crossing live racetracks, you can't tell when cars are arriving. Potential is there for injuries or even worse if this happens. So I think this is more about where we go from here. What should the precedent now be for crossing live racetracks? Because it is unacceptable that drivers can put themselves in such a situation of danger. I think maybe partly coincidence that Lewis has been involved and it's come up after Lewis, but it's something the FIA are looking deeply into. I think Lewis will be called up to the FIA press conference on Thursday, so maybe saying some words. But what I anticipate is not that Lewis gets a bigger punishment, is that there will be a kind of the law laid down pretty strictly now that any future breaches like this will not be tolerated at all.
Remember that karting driver, Luca Caberi, who threw a front wing or something on one of his competitors. Like, that was one of the most striking examples of what on earth are you doing? Whereas walking across a live track, I can understand why people think, are they coming down really hard on Lewis? But safety has to be absolutely number one, in case our viewers are thinking, hang on, they picking on Lewis for whatever reason, because he's a multiple world champion. Go and read John's article online. Really, really interesting. JBL, let me ask you about the battle for second. Now, look, these drivers, unless they're winning second, third, fourth, whatever, I guess it's honours really. But that fight if for second place, if Perez doesn't come home second with the RB19 at his disposal this year, Lewis has a chance of doing it. How do you read that battle?
I think the way things have gone over the last few races, I'd be surprised if Hamilton doesn't get it. He's 30 points behind now, I think. Perez has been, let's just say, off the boil in recent races.
That's very generous of you.
Yeah. My driver ratings won't be if he continues to follow in such a poor vein of form. There's been that point of the season where, and Perez spoke about it himself, that when they got to Barcelona, he felt that the car was no longer in kind of the window that he wanted it to be compared to the start of the season, where he sort of found the neutral steering sort of characteristics quite good. The more it's tended towards Max's preference for sort of like that oversteer, quite a sort of big turning moment at the rear, then there's moved away from Perez. That is one way to look at it, but I think you talk to a lot of drivers, and rather than expect a car to be sort of set up for you, and if it doesn't work for you, then you just go, okay, well, I can't drive this very well. You kind of have to do some adaptation yourself, and I think that's maybe where he's fallen short a little bit. Christian Horner has spoken about the need for Perez to kind of go back to basics, and they'll revisit, perhaps how he sort of pilots the car, let's say, in sort of more, I guess, granular detail than compared to what he's been doing. So that's where he is at the moment. Whereas Hamilton, he's got a car that's improved a lot over the season. Mercedes still isn't with Red Bull yet, but he just seems to be, Qatar aside, maybe this sort of consistent point scoring force. And if he's able to learn from Qatar and go, look, I don't need to lay it all down on the line on the first lap, then he's got a really, really good chance of, nicking second off Perez. I know that Hamilton won't particularly care about it. Perez probably isn't too bothered about it. It's more of an expectation at this point. But nonetheless, it's an interesting side plot, and I'm sure it will go down to the wire in Abu Dhabi.
John, midfield battles in Austin. Who will you be looking at?
I think the problem is the midfield's now massive, isn't it? Because there's basically Red Bull, then there's kind of the top end of the chasing pack, which is McLaren, Mercedes, Ferrari, and then the midfield is the rest, really. And it's kind of hard to pick because I think it'd be very hard picked to choose the 10th team because it kind of fluctuates a little bit. Williams has shown itself to make some good progress this year, and can get into Q3 and be battling for points. AlphaTauri's upgrade at Broughts in Singapore seems to have delivered a step forward. There'll be Daniel Ricciardo back as well, so they'll be pushing onwards. I think perhaps the most interesting aspect of the midfield is where Aston Martin and Alpine are shaken up, because they started the season as in that chasing pack right behind Red Bull. Seems to be nudging there, and they've drifted away as the second half of the season's gone on. Alpine brought an upgrade to Singapore, made a little bit of progress, but they need to improve qualifying pace in particular. And Aston's a really intriguing one because they've got a real fight in their hands now with McLaren for the Constructors' Championship. Lance Stroll's on this terrible run of no points since the summer break, out of Q1 for the past 4 consecutive races, not happy with the car, not in such a happy space as we saw with his kind of garage antics in Qatar. And Fernando's just Fernando. He'll keep extracting 100% out of that car to keep pushing on. So I think it's more intriguing I think Aston Martin's kind of the intriguing storyline for Austin, to see where can they get to. Can they address this slide from form, and what can they do to stop McLaren overtaking them?
So as we head towards this weekend, JBL, do you think that perhaps the attendance quota could be affected by the upcoming Vegas event? 3 races in the US, and of course, plenty of choice in North America now if you want to travel to go see some Formula One. Is it getting a little bit diluted, do you think, or not?
I think there's two things at play here. I think, first of all, the US is a very, very big country. Let's just say that, it probably takes the same amount of time to cross from one end of the coast to the other that it takes us to maybe get to Abu Dhabi or Qatar or something. So it's a big old place, and I think that people will prefer and will be biased towards an event that's a lot closer to them. But I think, secondly, the price point is another one. And as a lot of people are finding Vegas is an expensive place to go and race, the tickets are very expensive. The hotels are quite expensive to get your hands on as well. So I think there's a different demographic that is going to be, I guess, associated with kind of these races, and I think Austin will be a race that's sort of more for just like I guess the standard F1 fan, really. And a relatively affordable experience anyway. That's going to attract a lot of people because F1 is becoming increasingly more popular in the US. I think Vegas will be a little bit more specialized, and you kind of see, tickets for, I guess, the premium accommodation and that sort of thing, the astronomical cost. So that's kind of, it's tailored to that sort of audience. And then I guess you kind of have Miami somewhere in the middle. You have those sorts of luxury, extravagant aspects, fake yachts and whatnot, but you also sort of have relatively affordable points as well. So I think you have 3 races that cater towards different demographics in the US, different locales, different locations. 40 years ago, there was a possibility of having 4 races in the US before, Caesar's Palace was taken off. New York race didn't get off the ground. So it's not inconceivable that, they can all coexist peacefully and fill different niches.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a few people going along to the Vegas Grand Prix, maybe even for the first time, or, like the first year of Miami almost, sort of influencers and stuff. And it's going to be such a strange event for everyone to be so cold. the whole order could be shaken up. We don't know what we're going to see. And it could be a few scratched heads. Actually, John, that reminds me, John, you wrote a really interesting piece for the Plus subscriber area of our website. That's where we have our long reads and in-depth stuff. Excellent. I can recommend subscribing to that area about why there's no need to panic about. There's been a social media decline, particularly with the sort of the US really got behind sort of the Netflix effect of Formula One. And, your article was along the lines of, don't panic, Mr. Mannering. Nothing like a contemporary Dad's Army references there on a podcast and a video. But yeah, so can you explain a bit more why that's nothing so much to worry about, that we see social media in decline a bit?
Yeah, it was a report from a kind of social intelligence company called BuzzRadar, which just analysed social media's growth from 2016, so Liberty's takeover, basically up until now, and it basically plotted a chart. It was everything bubbling along quite nicely. A bit of a dip in 2018, interestingly enough. We had years of Lewis domination of Formula One, but it was all growing up. So it had a bit of a dip in 2018, which is a strange year to dip because the battle with Vettel that year was quite interesting and intriguing. So it wasn't the most dominant of Mercedes years, but for some reason that's happened. But we went up, and then we hit this kind of perfect peak storm end of 21, post Abu Dhabi. All the controversy and drama and anger that caused. Then we went into 22 with the new cars. Close championship fight at that stage between Ferrari and Max Verstappen and Red Bull. So I think this was the absolute peak, and it's kind of drifted down then and kind of almost fallen off a cliff at the start of this year in terms of just fan engagement and fan interest on social media. But I think actually that's no real surprise. If races are exciting with controversy, people talk about it, they get angry, they voice their opinions. When the races are quite straightforward, the same winner, it is going to go down. I don't think it's a particular shock that it's gone down this year. But all the messages you get from Formula One are actually that the sport's still in absolute robust health. And this is a bit like a dip you get in the stock market, that trace it back over 6-7 years, we're still miles higher. This is a bit of a stumble in the road, so to speak. But if we get a closer fight next year, I'm sure it will come back. And at the moment, you've got an F1 that sponsors absolutely love. Fan interest is still around. We see it on our own traffic. A boring race weekend will not generate the kind of fantastic response you get from races like Singapore, where there's much more interest. So you need these controversies. I think it's been a year where, just as 21 into 22 was a perfect storm of brilliance, this year we've had one man dominating the championship. We've had one team winning almost every race, a static driver market. No major off-track controversies have really bubbled up. So it's just been a fairly standard year we get in Formula One. But what this all means, this kind of standard boring year we've had, means it's all bubbling up for next year, doesn't it?
Really is. Well, first of all, though, this weekend, the COTA fans are always the best. They love the drivers. Big fan base for Daniel Ricciardo, who's back this weekend. Big fan base for Lando Norris as well in previous years. He's been absolutely swamped. All the drivers, big Red Bull fan base in North America as well. So we can't wait to see what the fans turn up with this weekend. We'd love to hear from you in the comments below about what you're expecting this weekend and the run-in and who is going to take the battle to, well, best of the rest, as I say. Leave a comment below. We'd love to see what's on your mind. If you haven't subscribed yet, then make sure you hit the subscribe and thumbs up button so we know you like the video and we'll make more just like it. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.